I enjoyed my job at MGM. I thought that that was going to be potentially a platform where I could stay for the rest of my career. Again, right? Not thinking about entrepreneurship at all. Um, and but then over time, I realized, you know, a lot of the things that I have even more conviction in now, right, from the Caesars days, and a lot of the new things that I have high conviction in, just very difficult to do inside those environments.
Hey guys, welcome to the How I Got Here podcast. I'm your host, Travis Waters, and I created this podcast to share stories that are worth telling, whether it's about somebody going from zero to hero, hero to zero, or something in between. On today's episode, we talked to Ryan Rubio, who originally started off at a very early age wanting to create a buy and resell video game company, how that transitioned into his fascination for hospitality and to where he is now with ZeroLabs in Vegas. Let's go ahead and jump into our conversation with him now. Hope you guys enjoy. Hey guys, it's me, Travis, with the How I Got Here podcast. Today we are joined by Ryan Rubio, and for those who don't know you by name or face, let's take a few seconds here, do a quick high-level overview of where you are in 2025 with career, job title, all that jazz.
Sure. My name is Ryan Rubio. As Travis just mentioned, it's great to be here. I'm a principal at ZeroLabs, which is at this point the largest early stage accelerator in Nevada, focused on all of Nevada's core industries. That's the obvious stuff, hospitality, sports, gaming, entertainment, which is why we're here today and how I met Travis the first time. But we also do a lot of work in fields like aerospace, energy, water, etc. We run a number of early stage programs for entrepreneurs across all these spaces. The biggest one that you may have bumped into on LinkedIn is called the Innovation Launchpad. We've made that available to the public since January of 2024. It's a 3-day intensive for all early stage founders, idea through Series A. In the first 5 cohorts, we've been lucky enough to work with 65 companies and 115 founders. And we're getting ready to welcome cohort 6, which is going to take place right before G2E, the Global Gaming Expo, here in Las Vegas, October 3rd through 5th. So I think that's pretty much where I'm at these days.
If you feel like you got a little notepad, you got to make sure you hit all the dots and or dot all the T's and cross. No, dot all
Done
the
this
T's.
intro so many times, yeah.
Dot all the T's. Oh my gosh. I don't know. You know what I meant. Dot all the I's and
Yeah.
cross all the T's. So, the question I like leading off with is kind of giving us a starting point on this chronological timeline. So, as far back as your memory allows, what was the very, very, very first, this is what I want to be, or this is what I want to do idea, and roughly what age were you when that kicked in?
Oh man. Um, so I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. Uh, my family was in the restaurant business for many, many years. In fact, just fully got out last year. And so, this concept of having ideas and kicking them around, and wanting to, do business was always sort of core, even though it took me a long time to become an actual entrepreneur myself. But I do remember there was one that I was hounding my parents about for a few weeks where uh, I thought I was going to open sort of my own bootleg GameStop equivalent, where I could sort of buy and sell video games on some sort of market, maybe outside my front door. We lived on a hill with like 6 houses, so I really don't know what I was going to do there. But I think I even got like a fake cash register for it. I must have been 6 or 7 at the time. But yeah, that was the first one, combined my theoretical, more abstract love of business with my very tangible love of all things video games at the time.
So I understand the whole through the family or it runs in the family, I guess you can say, of the entrepreneurial spirits. And I know you mentioned that video game idea was kind of just a few weeks of interest. What was so if that is roughly what you said about 6 years old? What was the next idea? Was it still something you creating your own company, or did you ever veer away from that as you went through grade school and everything?
Um, so I sort of took a circuitous path. So I actually, until call it actually my early 30s, I really never thought that I would be an entrepreneur in the classical sense. So, like many entrepreneurial families, having gone through that difficult journey, my parents bent over backwards not to pressure me into following into their footsteps, right? And so, I was encouraged to go get a good political science degree from a good little college on the East Coast. And from there, they said, okay, do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to work for the government? Do you want to keep sitting in libraries for the rest of your life working on papers that no one's going to read? And even though that was sort of what the path I was on, I was like, man, this is really not for me. And so that's when I started pivoting into business. But even then, I still wasn't in entrepreneurship. I was working in the restaurant industry. Ended up going to USC to get my MBA, where I started working at Universal Studios Hollywood, right, in operations. From Universal, after I graduated, Caesars Entertainment imported me to Las Vegas to work on digital transformation stuff in IT through a leadership development program. But all along the way, as I was developing these skills, I still really thought, hey, I am first and foremost here to steward these large brands and build these big experiences for the general public. And to the degree that I work with entrepreneurs, it's going to be bringing the best of their skills and resources and ideas into these more mature ecosystems and organizations, not necessarily building them myself. It was funny. I actually had a great class at USC, um, taught by a professor named Noah Wasserman. He's studied entrepreneurship for decades. And I went up to him after one class, and he had asked us, why we're all doing this. And I said, I'm, I just want to understand sort of the psychology of an entrepreneur better because it's such a deep part of my family's history. I said, I need to study it here because it's something I'm never going to do in real life. And then fast forward to June of 2022, I've met Quentin Singleton, founder here at ZeroLabs, and all of a sudden I found myself kind of taken by these ideas that had been slowly developing inside of me, all of my entire career up to that point. And I realized I was sort of confronted with the realization that the only way to bring all these ideas to life that I cared so deeply about was to really build something. I had to build a vehicle. And so it was a weird gap from basically being 6 years old to being almost 36 years old and wanting to take this on. But um, that was sort of the jump that it took for me.
Now, I know you said that you went to school in I think you said a nice little college on the east side. Um,
Yeah.
Political science, you finish your degree, and then your parents ask you, what do you want to do now that you have that? But while you were in school getting the political science degree, what was firing? What were the rockets going off of, okay, this I'm going to take this and do this, or was it purely let me just finish this and then figure it out?
Um, yeah, I wish I could say, there are certain people who are, and I have friends like this, very deliberate, very thoughtful, very strategic about most of their choices in life. I was more of a pinball, I think. I think what drew me to the work uh, that ended up being my major were some things that I can look back and connect some dots. Uh, the way political science was done at my school is very collaborative, very argumentative, very much trying to push to the boundaries of like what we know and challenge everyone's ideas, right? And then to go with that, I was a research assistant for 3 of those years. And weirdly enough, that was my first technical product that I built. At the time, it was, maybe still is, the largest English database of translated documents by people at like Al Qaeda, ASI, ISIS, etc. Because my focus was on international security and terrorism. And so I had to chop together this database and this janky product, but people from all over the world used it. People from the military, the government, other academics, they would come to us because we had all this information. And so that was really my first exposure to product development, even though I didn't have the vocabulary for it at the time, right? Um, but yeah, and so those seeds, eventually grew and laid the foundation for some things. But to answer your question very directly, like I had no idea where that was going to take me until I sort of got there.
And then you also mentioned about a course you took at USC. So political science was the East Coast college, but on the west side at USC, what was your focus there?
So MBA, just a bog generic Master's of Business Administration. It taught me how to find a way to answer every question with "it depends." Um, to the degree that I had a focus, it was really around operations and organizational behavior. Um, I had already started kind of pulling on some threads where I realized, I really enjoyed the clockwork of delivering service and sort of making a hospitality experience happen. And I also really enjoyed enabling people to the degree that anyone can do that, to do their best work, right? And so that's where I really picked up a fascination that continues to this day with sort of how do you structure teams? How do you build communities? How do you sort of put the infrastructure in place so that, when people come together to have an experience, it feels very seamless. It feels like the environment's just naturally supporting that happening. And so a lot of that work is very relevant to what we do now at Zero Labs.
So I know you're saying you kind of were getting a lot of real world experience after you got the political science degree, but while you were at USC getting the MBA, did you get a more defined idea of where you wanted to take both levels of education, or was it still courses, class first, degree first, then let's figure it out after the MBA?
Um, not quite as bad as my undergrad education. I knew I knew that there was a lot of legwork that needs to start early in order to have like a clean transition to the post-degree process. Um, what I didn't quite take into account though was how challenging it would be to bring an MBA into the restaurant industry, which is at the time I was very narrowly focused on that. Um, and the way you come up in the restaurant industry generally is, grind it out for 15, 20 years. If you're in finance, maybe you'll get an MBA at some point, but you've probably gotten it before you join the company because you're coming from an investment bank or a big accounting firm or consultancy. Um, and so I was really challenged at USC to think differently about what hospitality meant to me. Had this phenomenal career advisor, Nicole Butler, who now runs a big production company. And she called me one day walking out of the last career fair and before the first year ended, and you've got to have your internship lined up before the first year ends because you've only got one summer to work. And it wasn't looking great for me, I'll be honest. But she calls me. I've got my backpack on, I've got my suit, I'm sweating, and she goes, "Hey, I need you to come back up here and talk to Universal." And I said, "Nicole, like, you know, I'm a hospitality guy. Like, I appreciate you looking out for me, but there's nothing I can do for a film studio or a TV studio. I think they're great, it's just not for me." And she goes, "No, you idiot. It's the theme park. You need to be back here in 30 seconds before they leave." So there I was sprinting up the stairs. I met two fabulous recruiters, Nancy Chen, Melinda Barrow, who I'm still friendly with today. And what they helped me understand and what I would go on to really, really deeply immerse myself in over the summer was, you know, I had thought of myself as a restaurant guy, but really what I was passionate about was creating experiences for people, right? And making that happen at scale. And so, yeah, if you've been to Universal Studios Hollywood, they do $250 million a year out of like six restaurants. That would be a national restaurant chain by itself. But it's $1 billion theme park. And so where does the rest of that money come from? It's attractions, it's retail, it's partnerships, it's, the connection with the studio um, and all of that, the media universe. And the interplay between all those different parts of the machine was fascinating for me, and really stretched my understanding of what hospitality could be and where my role could be inside of it.
So your role with Universal, is it was it just the internship part of the summer, or is that something that you returned to after you got the MBA?
So it extended through all of my second year. I worked for an incredible woman named Lisa Jones, who she was the director of operational excellence for the whole theme park. And so it was called the X1 team. And so it's 20-ish people from every single function that are responsible for the park 24/7. And so I supported them with a number of projects over the summer. And then I was lucky enough to get invited back to spend most of my second year with them. And so I kept that role until I think it was April or May of 2017, right before I graduated.
And I know you mentioned that. So you originally had I want to do the restaurant stuff, and then you're like, oh, well, I can. There's a lot more things I can learn and get my hands dirty on
Mhm.
with Universal. And I know you, of course, Universal, as you said, has a lot of restaurants during the internship, and then the time up until you stop working for Universal. Did you get your hands on a lot of the restaurant stuff, or did you kind of back pocket that interest? And you're like, well, let me now that I have
Yeah.
access and experience in all of these things, I'm actually more interested in XYZ as opposed to ABC.
I really, it's a great question. I really started to move up the abstraction layer, like towards the park-wide view, right? And I think that was a product of where I was and who I worked for. Had I stayed, right, I would have probably moved off of that team into a vertical. The counterfactual is difficult, but like I probably would have ended up in food and beverage or maybe entertainment, but probably food and beverage. So, I still thought of myself as a restaurant guy who was doing park-wide operations. But sort of Caesars pulled me before I got a chance to really test the theory of, well, where do I want to stay in all of this?
And then you said about 2017 is kind of when the Universal one stopped, and that only stopped because you got the better opportunity with Caesars.
Um, Again, I wish I could say I was that strategic. So I was on track to convert Universal into a full-time role. Then they had a bunch of senior leadership retirements, and a new park president came in, hiring freeze across the entire thing. And so, I'm staring at student loans from USC and maybe something in 6 months at Universal when I met the Caesars folks. And it ended up being the perfect thing for me. Um, but it was also, again, sort of very fortunate that the timing lined up.
And I can only assume that part of the job opportunity is you going from the USC area, from the Universal area to moving your entire life to Vegas, right? Or was that something that you could work? I don't even know if remote was a thing in 2017, but yeah.
No, not in 2017. So when I met the Caesars folks, there's a guy named Ken Jansen, who's now the president of Green Valley Ranch here in Vegas, and another guy named Divvy, who I think is still over there running analytics. Um, they said they were running a very particular program, which, again, life is full of these happy accidents. Um, all of my very strange career had set me up to be a great candidate for. It was called the President's Associate. It's a program with a lot of history. It had been around since the 80s. At Harrah's Entertainment, then Caesars, and through all the different mergers. It had been dormant for a while, but they brought it back. And what it was is a way for Caesars Entertainment to bring in outside talent at the junior leadership level, immerse them in what it is to be a casino operator, and then sort of inject them into different functions inside the company. Um, and so when they came to me and they said, look, you've spent the last 2 years learning about complex multifunctional organizations that have all these different moving pieces, all these different revenue streams, all these different partner tenant relationships that need to present as a single unified thing to a guest every day. Um, would you be interested in exploring that in Las Vegas? And I've only been here, I think, twice at that point. But I said, sure. I said, let's give that a go and see how far we can push this sort of multifunctional ops strategy type thing that I had been nurturing.
Did you feel like because of the fact that they were kind of comparing what you're doing at Universal to what you could be doing in Vegas with Caesars. When you had that opportunity, you started doing that role or having that job. Um, were you noticing that there were a lot of similarities, or is it
Oh, no.
so like black and white? You're like, oh, this isn't anything like what I was doing before.
No, I mean, there's nuance to it, but I think a lot of the same principles, um, a lot of the same skills, even hell, even a lot of the same functions are copy and paste between the two types of organizations. I mean, both are running 24/7. Both offer more or less the same org chart, depending on how you want to look at it. Both have sort of complex national, international relationships between centralized corporate services and people that are, closer to the front line at the property level, trying to deliver that experience every day. Both deal with complex multinational customer bases. Um, I found it to be incredibly relatable. The hardest part for Caesars for me was transitioning into technology, because that's where that transition started to occur.
During your time with Caesars, did you essentially have the same role and responsibilities, or did you kind of grow into higher
Mhm.
up the food chain, I guess?
Oh man. So the way the program was supposed to work is you get hired. There were five of us, all from different places: Columbia, USC, two from USC, one from UCLA, Syracuse, maybe. trying to remember. Um, and the idea is that you would have three rotations across 18 months. No, across 2 years. Sorry. So three 8-month rotations. You would do one in corporate, one on property, and then one in corporate again. And I don't remember making the selection, but all of the talent management people tell me that this is what I ranked on my little survey. Um, I ended up in IT for my first rotation, and I never thought of myself. I like technology, right? I like video games. I'd grown up with computers, playing around with them, taking them apart, and everything else. But like, I'd never even come within spitting distance of an enterprise IT department. I'd all point of sale systems and stuff, right? Um, but I got tagged in with IT, and then I was assigned to the innovation group. Um, and I was about 3 days into that when the CIO's chief of staff happened to go out for emergency eye surgery, and she was going to be gone for an indefinite period of time. Incredibly talented woman named Crystal Fletcher. Um, and so I was like the only free head count in the department at the time, and I knew how to wear a tie. Apparently, I'm relating to you what my boss told me. But I got sort of snatched out of obscurity from the team I was supposed to be on, straight into like being like deputy or basically chief of staff to the CIO of Caesars Entertainment, a guy named Les Ottolenghi, who now runs VIP Play, um, for like 6 months. Um, and it was an incredible experience. I can circle back to that in a second. But so that was the first evolution of my role. Then for my property rotation, I went to the Link and the Flamingo, where I worked for Sherry Pucci and Eileen Moore, and helped deliver the property side of basically, we remodeled half of the Link for a corporate Casino of the Future project. And I was responsible for making sure that the project delivered in a way that was consumable by the property and minimally disruptive to the property while it was underway. Um, and then after that wrapped up, instead of taking a third department, I knew at that point I wanted to go back to technology. And so my third rotation was in IT. But that's where I started to transition to a full-time role as a director of technology planning and business development.
And then, so you, it was, at first I was going to ask if it was just that 2 year with those three rotations at Caesars, but it sounds like you were at Caesars a lot longer. So from 2017 of leaving Universal and starting the Caesars opportunity till you stopped essentially working in any aspect at Caesars, how
Yeah.
long was that timeline there?
Not much longer. They got acquired by Eldorado Resorts in 2019. I think that or started in 2018, the transaction closed in 2019. Um, my last day with Caesars was, I believe, November of 2019. So, 2 years and call it 3 months, 3 or 4 months, was my time there.
So you're still in Vegas today. So now I know we've been up to for the last 18, almost 24 months now,
Yeah.
or maybe longer than that. But if 2019 is where the Caesars experiment wrapped, what did you do after, and how long did it take you to find something, or was it something that
Yeah.
you had lined up even before you left Caesars?
Um, it's definitely not something I had lined up, even though I knew it was coming. So basically, El Dorado, I don't think incorrectly, just had a very different view of the role of technology for Caesars Entertainment. They used a lot of debt to make that acquisition work. And so they just really restructured everything around, cash flow, driving margin, trying to like rebalance that. And so, they told a lot of the technologists, they said, look, we appreciate it, all the work you guys have done. Most of the major transformations had been complete at that point, minus a couple. Um, they said, like, you can stick around, but like, we're not going to be doing this sort of work anymore, which is fair. You bought the company, you get to decorate. Um, and so I started looking, but I was really torn between two worlds, to be honest with you. Not many people know this. Um, at this point, to the point you made earlier, I'd only been in Vegas for 2 years, right? Which was roughly equivalent to how long I had been in LA. And so those two things still felt very comparable to me. And even at this point, right, I'd really only worked in a pure IT role for, call it, like 16 of those 24 months. And so in my head, I'm still like an operations guy that has recently been doing some technology work, not a technologist that knows operations. And so when I started looking, I kind of had two paths open. One was sort of Vegas technology. The other was going back to restaurants. And I ended up in late January of 2020, I had offers for both. Um, my first offer was to go back to LA to join the Madeira group. They run Toca Madeira at the Aria. And they were at that point contemplating opening 15 to 20 ultra luxury restaurants across the US in the next 20 months. And I was going to sort of shepherd that through from the corporate strategy side. Door number two was with a guy named Zaki Fasihudin at MGM Resorts to really come in and help him build out the business and corporate development team with a focus on sort of emerging technologies and applied innovation. And it was a very tough decision for me. Where I landed, though, was on MGM. Obviously, I'm still here because I just felt like there were so many threads from the Caesars days that we didn't get a chance to pull all the way to the end. And so I wanted to see where those things went.
So, what was your, I guess, day to day responsibilities with MGM compared to your experience with Caesars?
Good question. So I started in April of 2020,
Oh, yeah.
which was a very interesting time to start at a casino operator. Um, for a company with like over 65,000 employees, I think I might be the only person that onboarded that month. I think they just like chucked a laptop outside the IT office. Like there was no protocol, like no one knew what to do. Um, so the role there changed a lot, but I think in general it was much less planning than I did at Caesars, and much more sort of active innovation, right? Where we were running almost not necessarily like a pseudo product team, but the expectation was that we were trying to bring stuff to market through MGM Resorts to the benefit of MGM Resorts. And so we had a mandate to really go out there and work actively with whoever, whether it be other people in technology, specific properties, specific teams inside those properties, to look at ticketing, to look at hotel room, to look at gaming and all that stuff. And so um, it was it was nice because it was much more customer facing in a way. Um, we had some incredibly talented people working on network infrastructure and cybersecurity and all that stuff, which was a much bigger part of my mandate at Caesars to sort of be involved in those things and help support those functions. But at MGM, I really got to lean into sort of, okay, what do we want this to be from a guest and employee experience perspective? And then sort of back into that with whatever tools we needed to make that happen.
So I understand. I mean, we all know the chaos of the March and April 2020 time. So
Yeah, it's crazy.
once the world in general kind of started coming back to some sort of norm, did your responsibility shift at all now that people are actually coming back to the resorts and they're actually in person and doing these things? Or did it kind of stay like, oh, hey, well, we know that the world is eventually going to come back to normal. So in April 2020, you're doing this, and that's what you're going to continue with once that all that stuff shakes off.
I don't think the content of what we were working on shifted, but I don't think the way we did it changed. So I'll give you an example. Um, my first two projects at MGM, which basically consumed my first 8 months there, were figure out rapid on-site high quality COVID testing because we need to figure out how to get performance venues and conventions open again. So, we worked with folks at the NBA, we worked with folks at Clear, we worked with folks at a company named Q Health um, to kind of chain together a series of solutions that became kind of the largest rapid on-site molecular testing capability in the country to that point, right? And then the second project was MGM's got a really deep strategic relationship with Uber. And as part of that relationship, um, we had to implement a bunch of things on property, do some renovations, and then also figure out some touch points for like digital collaboration between the different loyalty programs. And, both of those things required me to really get out on the ground, spend time at each of the properties, develop relationships with people who are on like the pointy end of service, try to deeply inhabit kind of what is the customer's need here, and then look across not just all of MGM's capabilities, but all of our partners' capabilities to think about, okay, what experiences could we bring to life if we just line everything up the right way, right? Can we rotate things? Can we pinch and pull such that like we can create a capability that no one involved in this chain could offer by themselves? And we're going to use technology to facilitate that. And so when I say the role didn't change, the way we did it didn't really change, even though, obviously I wasn't working on COVID testing after 2021-ish.
So from that point to you, I guess like my first question is, at what point of this Vegas adventure did you first meet Q?
At MGM, mid 2021, um, this is the height of the last major crypto insanity. Our team had all of MGM's crypto experimentation, um, some of which is still not publicly talked about. But at the time, we were looking at sort of interesting gaming experiences, trying to figure out like, okay, is there anything we can learn from the crypto casinos? Is there anything we can learn from like just crypto video games in general that would be interesting here? And we were looking at doing a collaboration with a fairly large, a fairly well-known NFT project that just made a lot of sense. And Zaki, who was my boss at the time, was poking around in the city and said, hey, we're trying to do this weird thing in gaming. Who can help? Because it's 2021. There's no consultant you can call to say like, oh, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z with NFTs. No one knows what to do with NFTs. And the universal response was, hey, if you're trying to do something funky in gaming, you need to go talk to Q. And so he came on to consult with us on their project. incredibly helpful. Um, so much intellectual firepower there. But that's the first time we started to connect and share notes and sort of start to think about, hey, not just what looks different if we bring this project to life, but what else have you been thinking about in terms of the city and the industry as a whole, that we could bring together, that we could bring to life if we apply technology in a thoughtful way. Um,
To the NFT slash crypto side of things, was there ever any implementation on the actual like in person casino experience that was ever implemented on that side? Because I mean, I don't know if I was going. I think I was going to Vegas around that time, like 2-3 thousand times a year for these conferences. But was anything actually implemented in the brick and mortar side?
yes, only one of which I can talk about. Um,
Come on, man.
I know. Ask your casino host if you've got one at MGM.
But if they're hold on, how is something you can't talk about if it was prevalent in the brick and mortar experience? Because people would have seen it. Was it like quickly?
it
Go ahead.
it was not publicly marketed. It
Okay.
was sort of an invite only experience. Um,
So the one that you
but the
can
second
talk about.
the second one I can talk about, we actually worked with a company named Yellowheart IO, um, to sort of look at NFT ticketing. And we had a partnership with the Jabberwockies. It was a lot of fun. Ticketing is really hard. But we actually saw a decent amount of uplift, kind of merging the collectible with the ticket itself, for the shows that we tested it with. Um, I'm not sure where they kept going with that. Ultimately, I think a lot of the challenges around, let's just stick with ticketing, for example. And I think this is a lesson for anyone trying to innovate in Las Vegas or in any space that touches brick and mortar, is you'll often solve the technical challenges a long time before you solve the commercial or the contractual challenges, right? And so, Ticketmaster is just so deeply embedded in the way you run entertainment in Las Vegas. It's just very, very hard for any outside ticketing system to compete with that at scale. But we learned a lot, and it was a lot of fun.
On that topic of the Jabberwockies, was it like if you owned one of their collection, you essentially can go to a show, any show you want to at any time? Like how did that access work?
So you would the NFT was your ticket. So like the tickets were running on chain. Like it wasn't just like we're gonna scan a normal barcode. It's like no, like the entire thing was on chain, which was fun. The NFT itself had it was sort of like an animated playing card that was video content that they hadn't released publicly ever. They might have shot it just for this actually. Um, and then the idea was going to be that it would sort of put you into a loyalty program, and you would get access to meet and greets. You would have um, early access to all these other things, right? Um, and that was really it was very simple, very straightforward. We weren't trying to do anything crazy with it, but it was a great process.
Man, I wish I had. I don't know. I'm trying to remember what year that I went to the Jabberwockies, and I wish I would have known about that because I would have loved to be like have that meet and greet aspect to it.
Yeah,
So with this scenario, which I love the fact you said, like if you want to do something weird in Vegas, like reach out to Q.
thank you.
That's it's I don't know. That's just a funny saying. And anyway, so you meet up with him. He's helping you a lot on that idea, but on the outside of this project, you guys are just continuously talking to each other. What other ideas do you have? And then, of course, we know that blossoms into what is now ZeroLabs. But from you first meeting him to cohort one being at least scheduled, what is that time process between those two?
So I met him in spring of 21. I left MGM to join Zero Labs in June of 22, and cohort one took place late January of 24. So we actually had like 12 to 14 months in between each one of those milestones, right? Because I really thought, I enjoyed my job at MGM. I thought that that was going to be potentially a platform where I could stay for the rest of my career. Again, right? Not thinking about entrepreneurship at all. Um, and but then over time, I realized, you know, a lot of the things that I have even more conviction in now, right, from the Caesars days, and a lot of the new things that I have high conviction in, just very difficult to do inside those environments for a bunch of valid, legitimate reasons. And so I was trying to figure out, like, is there another vehicle to try to bring these things to life? And that's what really inspired me about the vision for Zero Labs, and what made it very easy for me to say, to get to a place where I could say yes in June of 22.
And I believe you said October 2025 is cohort number 6 now.
Yes.
How has it shifted from the first one, whether just you acquiring intel, you learning from each experience? How has it shifted the most from the first to what is now planned for the sixth?
Would it be helpful if I gave you like a little bit of Zero Labs history, lore?
Yes. Well, if you can't tell me what the second Web3 / NFT thing is, then I guess I'll settle for the ZeroLabs lore.
I I love my lawyers, all the lawyers I got to work with at MGM. I also do not want to be on the other end of the table from them at any point in my career because they're all phenomenally competent. Shout out Katie Manthe. Um, so, you know, Zero Labs went through a bunch of evolutions, right? It took us a while to sort of figure out what the vehicle was going to look like. When we first got together, we were like, oh, it should be a venture studio, right? We've got all the ideas, we've got the relationships, access to capital. But when we started pulling on that thread, we realized, oh man, there's just not enough. The bench isn't deep enough, at least that we could see, to scale a bunch of companies in parallel, even if you could launch them all, right? So we said, okay, well, maybe it's a maybe it's a fund, like a traditional fund. So when we went to go do the fund, the feedback we heard from a lot of people was, even people who had raised funds semi-successfully in Vegas, was, Vegas is a great place to celebrate selling a business, but it's not where you go to build one. We took that personally. Um, but what kept coming up again and again was sort of this idea that, people would say on the one hand, there aren't enough good deals for me to invest in. And on the other hand, there are no programs anywhere in the world producing deals, and Vegas certainly isn't the place to go build the deals. So we said, well, how do we address all three of those things ideally at once? And that's where the idea for the original Launchpad came from in, I guess, October of 23, that would have been. Um, and it was really just a proof of concept. We said, okay, let's give ourselves just over 60 days. Let's pull together this 3-day program. We said, oh, it should be 3 months. Now that feels like a lot of programming. We need a fast feedback loop. Also, like, that sounds expensive, and who wants to, like, we don't even know if we want to hang out with all these people for 3 months. So we said, what can we do to validate this concept as quickly as possible? Our MVP ended up being sort of a 3-day experience, late January, last week in January. Um, we ended up with, I think, 55, 65 applications for that first program. We had 19 teams, 21 participants, and it was a mess. It was an absolute disaster in so many ways. But the parts that needed to work worked really well. So, yes, we the schedule that I stupidly printed on the back of everyone's badges was out the window like 30 minutes into the first day. The catering, super sketchy. Networking event, very disorganized, right? But people came out of that weekend feeling a lot stronger about their projects. They had customers and partnerships lined up. They had expanded their network. They knew how Vegas connected to their startup's growth, right? And they had the resources and the relationships to bring that to life. And so, like, that's the core thing, and that worked. And so what we've been doing for the last 18 months is just polishing that up, trying to figure out how to scale that. And so a lot of to go all the way back to your original question now, what's changed? I think we've really sharpened the focus of the launch pad. We've really sharpened the delivery of the program. Um, we've found a lot of novel ways to integrate outside partners, alumni, et cetera, into the program itself. And then we're starting to really hone in on, nothing's ever guaranteed in startup land, but I feel really strongly that as you go through these programs, if you're willing to do the work, then we should be able to get you across the finish line for your next raise or your next major customer within 6 months very consistently. And that's been really exciting. We've had so much help along the way, but it's taken on a life of its own.
So we have now caught ourselves up to 2025, where we are right now. Now, a, a sidebar quick question, because I also have an entrepreneurial brain as yourself, and for me, I have a brain baby every day, and I if it's something that I can eventually monetize in a very short period of time, there's a whiteboard behind my monitor that I write it on. So the reason I'm referencing this is because you originally had this video game notion early on of reselling used games, and then you also had this fascination for restaurants. So while you're crushing it with Zero Labs in Vegas, is there any itch to take one of the interest that you've essentially put in your back pocket, and are you constantly like spinning wheels for them, or are they all laid to rest?
Um, I think my brick and mortar aspirations are gone. I think I would love to own a restaurant or a lounge someday, but I've also been around the industry long enough to know that that's probably a very expensive hobby versus a way I'd actually try to make money. Um, I do think like as far as things that are in the backlog, when we were thinking of Zero Labs as a venture studio, right? And a lot of those ideas that came out of my days at Caesars and my time at MGM, right? I'm always looking for startups that are working in those spaces and that have sort of shared that insight. And we've seen a few come through, but a few of my most exciting ones, uh, no one's no one's landed on them yet. And so, at some point in the future, I think I would love to maybe take those off the shelf. But right now, the most fulfilling thing for me is just really trying to flesh out everything that Zero Labs could be, because it still has so much room to grow.
So now that we've got the entire start to now, the question I like ending on for these episodes is, if you were to look back on the entire timeline from buying that cash register to wanting to sell door to door or out of your front door the used games to where you are now, there's a lot of things that happened that were both in your control and outside of your control, things that we attribute to as like the butterfly effect that shift
Mhm.
our life's path. If you were to attribute one specific butterfly effect, whether it was in your control or outside of it, that took you to where you are today, what single event would you tie to that, or tie to that the most?
There's a lot of contenders for this, but I would probably have to say the phone call I mentioned that I got from my career advisor walking out of that last career fair, because if I hadn't picked up the phone, or if I had left even 5 minutes earlier, and I had already been on the train back downtown where I was living at the time, I never meet, maybe I don't meet those recruiters, and then Universal doesn't happen. My definition of hospitality doesn't happen. Caesar certainly doesn't happen, which means MGM doesn't happen, which means Zero Labs doesn't happen. And so, if I had to pick one kind of linchpin in the whole thing, it's that phone call. I'm very grateful she called.
Well, I have not heard linchpin since Cohort. I know that's a word we used a lot in Vegas at Zero Labs. And I was like, that's
Uh,
part of that vocabulary. And I was like, oh, where have I heard that? You? Oh yeah, that was Zero Labs.
uh,
I don't know. Anybody that's watching that party, that probably won't make any sense to you, but it's just, I don't know, a little funny callback. So I appreciate your time, Ryan. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, you see his name right there on the screen. If you're not, Ryan Rubio, if you want to send him a connection request on LinkedIn, if you're interested about Zero Labs, I definitely recommend it. I was part of it. It was extremely helpful, which is where I met Ryan in the first place. Yeah, thank you again for your time, Ryan. Thank you for your story. And if I have to give you 3 or 4 drinks, get that second story out for that Web3 deal, we'll make it happen.
I'm a reformed casino exec. It might take more than 3 or 4, but we can give it a shot.
All right. Well, I'll see what happens when I see you in a couple months.
Beautiful. Thank you,
All right.
Travis.
Thanks, guys.